Welcome back to another deep dive. This one is on an OG in the space, Self Repaying Loans. Remember that? Today, we're talking about alCheMix. So as always, let's get straight to it. Now, for those of you new here, this is my deep dive series. Here we have very long, in-depth videos. So as always, I recommend you to sit back, relax, grab a pen and paper if you want to make some notes, grab yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, sit back, relax, and enjoy the deep dive. So without further ado, we're going to jump straight into it. Today we're going to talk about alCheMix, which is a Ethereum-based protocol, but also now on a variety of layer 2 chains too. We have a lot to cover. Well, we're going to talk about, first of all, alCheMix, what it is, the products, a little step-by-step guide, and then we're going to cover some of the metrics as well, including revenue, token, some of the issues that have recently happened, but also some of the competition. And then, of course, we always end these things off with the bull and bear case as well, with a little summary at the end. So in DeFi today, we often have to make a choice with the assets that we have. And this is a you could say this is a problem because we've only got two choices. We can either A, save it, and we can do this by using our assets in various different DeFi yield strategies, or we can spend it, and we often have to take those assets off chain to a centralized exchange so that you can basically take your assets into the real world. This is a problem because why can't we do both? And we'll touch on that shortly. The second thing is that when it comes to loans, and this is a picture of Aave, there are a couple of issues. Firstly, the interest rate that you have to pay, of course, is variable, constantly changes. And secondly, you have the worry of liquidation. So, you know, if you're taking quite a high leverage, let's say 50%, and, you know, in one day your asset drops 50% in value, that is a big worry. And there's many cases where some of the big assets, big blue chip assets, I should say, have actually dropped significantly in just the space of a day. I mean, just remember the day where we saw the Luna collapse. Just remember the day where we saw the FTX issues. Remember the day where we saw the COVID crash. Things have got really bad in a very short period of time, and liquidations are something that you do have to worry about. Now, what if you could have a non-liquidatable self-repaying loan? Sounds pretty good, right? Why would you want to do this? Well, you can do both. You can save and spend at the same time. You don't have to worry about liquidation, and your underlying collateral is used to pay back the loan. Sounds like a fantastic solution to all of these problems, and that's pretty much what alCheMix is doing. So alCheMix finances this future yield-backed synthetic asset protocol that basically allows you to deposit a collateral, take out a loan against it with these synthetic tokens, and we're going to talk about them shortly as well. They have a variety of products. They've called them the alCheMix Transmuter. They've got alCheMix Assets or AL Assets and the Elixir as well. And we're going to briefly talk about all of these so you get a good understanding of how all of these products work together. So alCheMix, it is a lending protocol. Intrinsically, it is just a lending protocol with the same type assets. So essentially, you can deposit ETH as a collateral. You can borrow synthetic ETH against it. You can deposit a USD stablecoin. You can borrow a synthetic USD against it. And they do support a variety of stablecoins, like, you know, the big ones really, USDC, USDT, but also DAI and Frax and ETH. You know, we're going to talk a lot about some of these different assets and different strategies too. I'm sure many of you are aware of the big LSD narrative that is going on right now. We're going to talk about that too as well. Now, essentially, the first product, alCheMist, essentially allows you to deposit any of these assets and into various different strategies, and then you can basically use that collateral and borrow up to 50% against it. We're going to talk about how this works too. So who's actually using a product like this? Well, there's two main people. There's yield maxis like me, and there's people who actually want to cash out, people who want to basically take some of that money into the real world. And actually, there's some really lovely stories that I've actually read from the alCheMix Discord and the Medium pages about people who have paid for a wedding, bought a wedding ring, paid for a holiday. Lots of really lovely things that people have actually done with alCheMix, and it was lovely to see some of them as well. It did go pretty crazy in the last bull run too, for sure. So how does it work? Well, first of all, you need to have either your stable or your ETH. and you need to then pick a vault of your choice. Now you can go to ALCHEMIX, and this is what the DApp looks like, and you'll be able to see that there's lots of these different vaults here. So for example, DAI, USDC, USDT, and these are all Aave vaults. So essentially what's happening is if you deposit your asset like USDC into this Aave vault, it's basically going into Aave and will be used as collateral there, or lent out essentially. Similarly with the ETH vault, you can see you can deposit ETH, and there's lots of LSD providers here like Lido, Rocket Pool. You've also got Aave, Frax as well. So lots of options there for you too. So yeah, this is what it looks like when you go and deposit. So you basically click on a vault. Let's say you've got 10 USDC here. You'd basically deposit it in here, and you'll be able to see that each of these vaults do have a utilization. So once they are full, you can't really use anymore, and you can see the APR that you are making there as well. You've got a loan to value ratio of 50%, and that's because you can borrow up to 50% of this collateral. So just keep that in mind too. So you can borrow 50% in alUSD or alETH. So these are Alchemix's own synthetic assets. This one is US dollar backed, and this one is ETH backed. And so you can see here when you go and deposit, let's say I've deposited 10 USDC here, it's going to pop up over here $10, and you're going to have up to $5 of credit, obviously 50%. So then you can borrow 5 alUSD essentially, and the underlying will obviously earn this yield like in Aave, and pay off the loan slowly, and you can use the alUSD as you wish. You can save it or you can spend it. It's entirely up to you. There are obviously a few other products as well, and again we're going to just explain these just so you understand the concept. There's a transmuter, and this is essentially the primary restoring mechanism to make sure that those AL assets can actually be redeemed for their underlying assets. So you can go to the transmuter and you can actually redeem your alUSD for a stable coin, for example, or alETH for ETH itself. Now, the transmuter often did fill up, so often there were lots of assets in here that weren't actually being utilized, and so that's why the Alchemix team created this elixir, which can be used to basically create extra value. Now, there is a flow sheet here that you can pause the video and have a look at and see how it works exactly, but we're going to talk about this on the next slide anyway. So here's a little diagram that I did create. Yes, I know it's not the greatest, but I just wanted to give you guys an idea of basically the whole user flow of what happens. So you as a user, you've got your stable coins or your ETH, you deposit it into Alchemix, and you can borrow this alUSD against it. Of course, if you're depositing ETH, you're going to borrow alETH against it. And that basically gets used in various different yield strategies. So Yearn is another option, Aave, of course, as we just talked about. So you're earning yield there, and that underlying yield is used to pay back the loan, which of course you've provided. Now, some of the assets that actually get deposited into the Alchemist don't actually go directly to the yield, to earning yield, sorry. Some of them actually go into what's known as the transmuter, and the transmuter is there to essentially help with some of this yield actually goes towards the transmuter, and that helps to, of course, pay back some of your deposits. So for example, if you've got alUSD and you want to convert it into stable coins, you can do that directly with the transmuter. That's the primary peg stability mechanism, essentially. Now, sometimes this does get filled up. We often have so many deposits coming into the Alchemist that we don't actually need the transmuter to have so much funds within it. That's when funds get sent to the elixir, and the elixir essentially goes to platforms like Curve and basically provides things like USDC against the alUSD to basically provide deeper liquidity. So we've got a second alternative for swapping out of your AL assets. You don't have to only use a transmuter. You can use the elixir, which has these AMOs, which they've copied from, or I say copied, they've taken inspiration from Frax to basically have these market operations running on platforms like Curve. Here's a flow sheet. You can pause the video and have a look and essentially see all the different options that the elixir has. For example, adding liquidity to the Curve pools. Obviously, they can then earn the CRV and CVX rewards. Those can be used to earn boosted yield. They can be locked to earn further CVX or CRV rewards. or they can be used as well on top of that actually to vote on certain pools, like for example the alChex pools, and you can then earn further yields and rewards, and that incentivize liquidity as well. So there's a whole flywheel there. You can certainly see some of the benefits that the Alexa brings. Now there is a problem. Why would we even want to use alUSD or alETH? What is its purpose? Well, I think its main purpose is, of course, yield, right? I think essentially the idea is this is just essentially a tokenized version of your future yield that you're just getting up front. I think one of the issues really that I found was that the liquidity isn't the deepest. And I found that if I were to do a $10,000 swap from alUSD to USDC, I am actually losing around $70. So I would have liked this to be a bit of a tighter peg. You can see the peg is 0.993 almost. So there's a few basis points there that we're missing. And I think if we can find more uses for these synthetic assets, it will reduce the sell pressure of these Alchemix assets as people get them. It will take some load off the peg maintenance, and it will be better for the token price overall as well. And I think Alchemix have actually been trying to work on this pretty well actually. They've had a number of integrations of these AL assets within the Curve ecosystem with the likes of Curve, Convex, Yearn, StakeDAO, Frax Saddle, some of the big players around anyway. But also I have actually seen some really interesting ones, like the use of AL assets on Premia, and also the Holy Hell debit card. You've also got Velodrome and some of these Balancer, Oro, Ramses, which I believe is on Arbitrum Optimism. And so yeah, it's really nice to see that there are some integrations, and you can use something like the Holy Hell debit card to basically pay with alUSD. I think that's really nice to see. And I think more of these will only reduce the sell pressure, be better for the peg, and might actually be better for the token price, which we're going to talk about later as well. Some interesting concepts as well, just to obviously increase the use of these synthetic assets, is that we've got Self Repaying ENS, and essentially Alchemix can put your ETH to work, a constant flow of funds for perpetual ENS renewals, so you don't have to worry about if it's ever going to expire. You can basically search for a domain, like let's say you owned food.eth, you can basically select auto renew, drop your ETH in here, that will consistently over time pay itself, and you won't have to worry about having to renew it or anything like that. So things like this are really, really cool for sure. I think just one thing to add is that at the moment, I think because there are some issues with alETH that we're going to talk about shortly, I don't think this is actually live at the moment, but maybe by the time you're watching this, it is working again. Now, revenue, I think this is probably one of the most important parts of what we're going to talk about today. How much is Alchemix making? Now, they have these wonderful reports that they release every quarter. They haven't actually done Q3 just yet, but they have actually done Q2. So we're going to use Q2's data, and essentially we can see that Alchemix earns revenue from a variety of places. They actually earn revenue from the AMOs, but also some of the liquidity directing DAO tokens like CVX, CRV, Aura, etc. And what they do is a third of the revenue goes back into the Treasury, a third goes into ALCX buybacks, and then a third goes into accumulating more DAO tokens. So we've got a really good mechanism that benefits all parties really. And how much revenue does Alchemix actually make? Well, if we go just to here, in Q2 they actually made $1.8 million, most of that being in the form of the CRV token, which has actually been going down in price. Not bad, I'd say, especially when you account for their expenses being $450,000. And we're going to talk about kind of where this puts it in terms of earnings for sure. So $450,000 expenses and 1.8 million in revenue. I believe Q1 was somewhat similar too, and so maybe Q3 might be a little lower, purely just because some of these tokens have actually gone down in price compared to Q1. But I think generally this is revenue that the protocol is making, and I'd like to think that this will continue. So let's talk about the ALCX token. Of course, we know that a third of the revenue is used for buybacks here. This is the governance token for Alchemix, and a minimum of 50 is needed to post a proposal. They do have a big tokenomics upgrade upcoming, which we're going to talk about. This is basically the supply over time. I think this chart is not the best. However, this one might explain where we are a little bit better. We're obviously a little bit past this white line. So you can see that emissions are certainly going down, and total supply is definitely leveling off somewhat for sure. So we are probably where my mouse is right now, somewhere around there. So maybe just a little while longer, and emissions will level off for sure, which is nice to see. I think we can appreciate it a little bit more here. We're somewhere around there. So maybe as we get on to next year for sure, and especially midway through next year, then I think certainly these emissions will slow down, and that will obviously benefit the price. TVL wise, Alchemix has been down only. As you can imagine, it is a bear market, but we're going to talk about that later as well. Now, in terms of the token, something that I thought was interesting, and this kind of goes back to the previous slide where we talked about revenue. If you take the Q2 revenue, that annualizes at around $7.5 million. And if you basically take the fully diluted value market cap of Alchemix, and basically divide that by the revenue, we can essentially create some sort of price to sales ratio. And we've got a ratio of 4. Which I think is really, really, really low, actually. I think it's really great to see a protocol with such low market cap actually create so much revenue for its actual market cap. Now, I think the big problem here is that this revenue is not actually going to the token holders currently. Yes, there are buybacks, but the token holders don't actually earn this revenue. So yeah, I think just something to pay attention to for sure. And of course, we have to remember that a lot of the revenue is actually being spent on the Treasury expanding, but also the revenue is being spent on those governance tokens as well, like accumulating more CRV, CVX, which I think in the long run is actually going to be really, really, really beneficial. As I mentioned, Alchemix at the moment doesn't really do too much in terms of their token, but they do have some big token upgrades coming out pretty soon. And one of them is the VE ALCX token, which will receive yield. It's going to have enable boosted yield. It's going to have some gauge voting. There's going to be governance as well. So and on top of that, a proportional split of the AMO and Alchemist revenue for each of those AL assets will actually go to these VE ALCX token holders. So I think this is great, and when this comes, I certainly think there will be some excitement for sure. There is potentially a new token as well. Is this one called Mana? I didn't find too much on it, but I did find this from an article from the Alchemix team, and essentially this may be a second token which can be used in combination with ALCX to boost unlock early and very potentially various other features too. So that's going to be exciting to see how that comes about for sure. In terms of metrics, as we mentioned, TVL is fairly down. Was $1 billion plus at the peak, but I mean, this is the bear market. Every protocol has suffered the same effect. Liquidity wise, there is pretty strong liquidity. Like I did mention that, if you're wanting to swap between alUSD and USDC, you will have some slippage there, but there is still 100 million plus in liquidity across all the different chains, which I think is good, and hopefully will continue to grow. One metric that I did see was that there are less than 1,000 users for all AL assets across all chains. I guess it is the bear market, so you're going to have less than 1,000 users across pretty much most of your DeFi apps today anyway. I'm pretty sure perpetual exchanges, lending markets, they all have less than 1,000 users anyway. So yeah, TVL has been steadily declining. I wonder at what point that will change. I think most of this is not due to any issues from Alchemix themselves. Rather, I think it's mostly just because of the ongoing bear market trend, and we've seen this across the face in DeFi today, and you can see that directly from that chart. So something that did happen recently was there was a big exploit, the curve exploit. Now I have actually made some content about what happened here, but essentially in July there was a big curve exploit. Curve use some of the curve pools were using an old version of Viper, and essentially some of these protocols were affected. Alchemix was one of them. JPEG and Metronome were also affected, and essentially what happened was an exploiter was able to remove all the available ETH in the alETH liquidity pool. So they removed all of the ETH, and they removed 4,800 alETH. The remaining balance of the pool was 0 ETH, but also 3,800 alETH as well. Now, an MEV bot purchased this 3,800 alETH for a tiny fraction. So at the end, the balance of the pool was basically next to nothing. But this MEV bot or arbitrager basically sold this 3,800 ETH into another pool for only 500 ETH. So essentially this alETH just got sold off for 500 ETH. It's lost so much value, and the LPs are the ones who have been affected because the pools were refunded. The exploiter returned all of the funds that they stole, meaning that the whole was just this 3,800 alETH. And so the LPs have lost a fair bit of money. The question is really kind of what's going to happen in future. There's lots of discussion in the Discord about this. There's lots of discussion on various forums like this as well. Hopefully they do come to a conclusion, because there are quite a lot of missing funds. You know, the MEV bot sold at roughly 10 alETH to 1 ETH. And so therefore the profit of every arbiter buying or selling was the stolen ETH directly represents the loss to the LPs. And the LPs have lost a lot there. So something to worry about, or I say worry about, something to think about for sure in terms of what's going to happen next. But these guys are very smart, and I believe they'll hopefully figure out a good solution for everyone. The Treasury is pretty good, and I think this definitely helps with that. You can see they have around $30 million in their Treasury, consisting of mostly ETH, but also alETH as well, Alchemix, the governance token, and then also some of these other revenue generating tokens like CRV, CVX, Velo, StakeDAO, Aura. Yeah, this is really good to see. FXS as well, really good to see, bigger than most DeFi protocols, and I think with a treasury like this that's constantly expanding due to the constant revenue that this protocol is bringing in, this is hopefully going to be a good thing in the long run for sure. The Alchemix team is also a fantastic team. They have they've split the team. They've got 3 sub-working groups as well, with business dev, a team that does the quartile reports, a governance as well, and so that's funded by ALCX. But the actual core team itself, you've got Scoopy, who's the founder, also some of these other founders as well, Gorby, N4NO, Techno, and then also some of these other core team members. I have to say thanks to some of them for helping me out making these slides. We've got Metalface and Overqualified, who really helped me out, so I appreciate their kind time. What we do know is that these guys are chads. These guys are really intelligent people. Go and follow them on Twitter and you'll find out yourself. You don't really see teams as strong as this, who have been constantly building throughout the bear market. Good to see. Yes, they are anon, but I think they are some of the best around in DeFi for sure. So what's next for Alchemix? So I think one of the biggest things coming out is V3. There's so much hype around it, but we don't actually know what it is. I've tried to get it out of some of these team members, but I have no idea what it's going to be. I think there will be a new product for sure. And I think the other things that we are going to see is the improvements to the ALCX token, the launch on layer 2s, increased asset integration, decentralization. I think overall there's lots of exciting things for Alchemix. And I'm really just waiting to see what V3 is all about. That is the game changer for me. And I think when V3 comes out, we definitely need to turn the camera on and make some videos about that for sure. In terms of competition, the lending landscape is very competitive. We have the likes of Aave, Gearbox, Silo, and Frax, maybe even other lending platforms that I haven't even talked or thought about off the top of my head. So that is somewhere where I think competition is going to play a part. But I think alChemisx do have a fairly unique product when you compare them to some of these other ones. One thing that I did notice there were actually a number of these self-repaying loan protocols that actually launched, especially with the ETH LSD hype. I'm not going to talk about them today, but what I do know is that most of them did fail. Most of them have failed. And the other thing as well is that we have seen a number of forks. Most of them have also failed and not really been able to replicate any success the same way that alChemisx has. So that does go to show something that, you know, creating a product like this is very intricate and it's not easy. And yes, there probably will be more forks in the future, but I think the idea is that, you know, if a protocol is even forking you in the first place, it means you're doing something right. Our favorite part, the bull and bear case. So the bull case, I think for sure alChemisx has survived. It's survived the bear market and it thrived through the bull market. And I think as we get closer and closer to hopefully a potential bull market, we can return to those great times as well. I think expanding to layer 2s is going to be a great option as well for the growth of alChemisx, especially because I think some of the smaller whales or smaller fishes like me are kind of priced out from using Ethereum all the time, and using Optimism or Arbitrum or any of the new layer 2s coming out is always going to be a great thing to use. They are building some new product with V3. I don't know what they're building, but whatever they are, I hope it's going to be great. And I think it's bullish to think about just building in general. I think we're going to see increased options when it comes to utilization of alUSD and alETH. I think alChemisx is obviously cash flow positive. That's always a great thing to see. We don't see that often enough in DeFi. Token emissions are shrinking. Is the worst over? The alETH issues with the curve exploit was quite severe. Must be a very stressful time for everyone involved. Is the worst of it over? I really hope to think so. I think we've got a really well-versed and trusted team that have built great products that have stuck around. They've got a huge treasury, the cash flow positive. I think what is there not to like, really? There are some bearish things as well. I think, as I mentioned, the lending landscape is quite competitive, and it is quite intense competition, and there is constant innovation. So the alChemisx team do need to continue this innovation if they want to hold that moat that they have. What moat exactly does alChemisx have? Well, I think the whole concept of self-repaying loans is something that another protocol can fork. They have done, but it hasn't been very successful. So it's something that I'm still thinking about, actually. Can the products be forked? I mean, they have been, but they haven't been very successful. So alChemisx clearly does have some moat there for sure. There are a lack of users, but like I said, I think we're deep in the bear market, and I think beforehand, especially before the alETH curve issues, the demand was high, and some of those pools were completely full. I think rather the issue is scalability. So the protocol demand is not really an issue, but the scalability, and apparently V3 aims to address this. That's what I've been told from some of the team members. Don't know exactly what the details are. And lastly, the LPs are not really properly compensated. Some of the yields you could say are fairly low, and hopefully V3 aims to address this too. So overall, I think alChemisx is a really, really exciting platform. I think there's so much going for it that it's hard not to be bullish on alChemisx as a whole. The concept is interesting. They've got a great team. They've got a good treasury. The protocol works. Yes, there was a curve exploit that did affect it, but it wasn't directly on alChemisx, so that's always good to see. Yeah, I think I'm excited to see what alChemisx has next. So I think alChemisx is a wonderful protocol. I was privileged enough to be able to cover it today. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you think about alChemisx. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm down to have some chats for sure. So that's all I'm going to talk about today. That's all we're going to cover. Smash the like button, subscribe to the channel. If you're watching this on Twitter, give it a like, give it a retweet, drop a comment down below as well. And then we'll be back with plenty more deep dives in the near future.